Yeah, RoadtoBio. Now, it has a duration time of 2 years, and we had a budget of close to 1 million euros, and we were 4 partners. So it was BTG, it's a biomass technology group. These are consultants from the Netherlands. One of our partners were the Nova Institute for Ecology and Innovation, based in Cologne. It was us, the DECHEMA, the Society for Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology. We are based also in Germany, in Frankfurt, and Ifotech, a consultants agency from London. And the project were funded by the BBI. BBI is a bio-based industries joint undertaking, and it's a private-public partnership that was established in 2014. And the private-public means that it was funded by, or it is funded. It's a public-private partnership, and that's part in the European Union, and the second part is a bio-based industries consortium. This is a society for, or it's, yeah, from different chemical companies that are interested in bio-based production of chemicals. And in 2017, they published the updated Strategic Innovation and Research Agenda, shortly ZERO, where everything is based on, that we developed in RoadtoBio. So first, what was the project about? In 2016, only close to 10% of the chemicals that were produced in the European Union were bio-based. And from this point, they had the main goal to increase this bio-based share up to 25% in 2030. So that's quite an ambitious goal. And the main question here was, how is it possible to reach this goal? So the first key challenge here is, how can the European chemical industry remain competitive and at the same time become more sustainable? And to answer this question, we had 2 parts of the development of the roadmap. First, we made analysis of the barriers, the opportunities, and the enablers. And then from this, we created an action plan. And this action plan included an action plan, an engagement guide, and a strategy. How is it possible to reach this? And all of the 4 partners are very good in creating roadmaps and the analysis, but to be honest, we don't know so much about the chemical industry itself. So that was the main reason why we included, always the stakeholders here. So we always had some interviews and feedback loops with the chemical industries, with different NGOs, with the administrative bodies. So we included the European Union as well, and different governments here. And yeah, so what did we do in these 2 years? First, we made different analyses. So we published different reports on bio-based opportunities, what chances do the chemical industry have to increase the bio-based share. Then it's also important, if you want to sell bio-based products, then that there are also customers who accept it, or who say, yeah, we want bio-based chemicals. So we made, or we put a lot of effort in to understand the market and how is it possible to increase the bio-based share. We also analyze the regulatory barriers here, and we made 9 different case studies on potential attractive opportunities for the chemical industry. So here we had a closer look at 9 different chemicals. All of these reports you can find at our website, RoadtoBio.eu. And as I mentioned before, this is all the analysis that we did, and we made some research for that, and we had a look at different data, at Eurostat, etc. But we also included the stakeholders here. So we had conducted different workshops here and had some feedback loops. We also conducted some webinars, and presented all the results at different events, and had here interviews face-to-face, as well as some phone interviews to understand the market here. And all of these results we put in our roadmap. So we have different types of documents that we developed. The first one I want to present here is a strategy document. This is our largest document. It's quite heavy, I would say. Yeah, we have different, it presents you the background report here, so that you understand what is the roadmap about and what is the bio-based market here for the chemical industries. So we present also 9 different product groups. Yamini present to you the main results in a couple of minutes for 3 different product groups, and also have quite a huge chapter about the general barriers and how to overcome these. A second document that we developed was an engagement guide. Here we have 3 different fact sheets. The first one is the reader's guide to explain how to use the roadmap and how to get the most for you out of these different documents. We also offer you different key message to communicate the bio-based vision, I would say, to your customers or to customers in general, and a communication guide how to use these key messages. And the third document that we developed is an action plan, and this one gives you a quick overview about the actions that need to be performed to overcome the general barriers as well as the product-related barriers. Now I want to give you a quick overview about these 3 documents. The first one, as I mentioned before, the strategy document is the biggest one, and it provides you a background information about everything that we integrated into our roadmap. And first it gives you a background information about the chemical industry, about the project, about the scope, because the scope here is quite important, I would say, to understand how is it possible to increase the bio-based share. And to make it more understandable what we did, we also offer you here, or provide you here, the overview about the methodology that we used. Then we give you a closer detailed look at the 9 different product groups that we analyzed, and also the barriers. So here you can see the value chain from about the scope, what we had a look at the RoadtoBio project. First, we started with the raw materials here. And when we talk about the share of 25% bio-based products here, that we want to increase this share, we are always looking at the volumes of the crude oil that went into the chemical production. And from this raw material, we are going to the building blocks, so the platform chemicals, and here we are looking at the opportunities and the barriers that we identified here. You can find that in the final roadmap as well as the case studies. And from these different various building blocks, we are going into the product groups and the different products that are going out here. So, and here we are presenting you the potential actions that we recommend you to overcome these hurdles. So, the second document that we developed is an action plan. For new readers, I would say that's the first entry point, because here we give you a quick overview and all the important figures at one place. So you can see what are the different product groups and what are the opportunities that we have, but also the different barriers that we identified and all the actions that need to take to overcome these. Yeah, and here again, Yamini will give you here a closer look in a couple of minutes. And the last one we have is the engagement guide. Here we have different, 3 different documents, as I mentioned before. So the first one is a reader's guide. The second one are the key messages, and the third one is a communication guide. Here, this document you can use to get some tips and tools to communicate about bio-based products, because it's as we one of our main results of the reports on public perception is that it's not an argument that a product is bio-based. It has to get to increase use for the customer. Well, that's the reason why we developed the key message and communication guide to show you how to communicate the advantages here. So here you can see a quick overview about the engagement guide or the different documents. I have to say here we had some copycat mistakes. So the first one are here important or right. So the reader's guide is the content here is how to read the action plan and the strategy document and how to use it. So what's in it for you or the reader here? It helps you to make most of the roadmap, to understand the structure. Yeah, the second one is a communication guide. And here you can find some recommendations for to communicate the vision of bio-based products, but here it's tailored for different target groups, so for businesses and customers or societal stakeholders, because we identified it's not always the same advantage that you have to highlight here. So it also includes some take-home messages and some info on communication challenges here. Yeah, and what's in it for you here? This one I want to, here we have this copy mistake. I want to change it afterwards, then you can see it. It helps you to effectively address the specific target groups here, and it gives you an overview of the results of our of multiple projects here. And the last one are the key messages, and the key messages about the value of bio-based products. So as I mentioned before, so bio-based is not a good argument for the customers to buy a bio-based or the product. It always has to increase the value for them. So then it's possible that they say, okay, we want to pay more or something else. And to understand what is a bio-based product. So that's the reason why we develop these messages, and we designed them so that each company can find specific messages for them and to communicate it to a broader public. Here I have a quick example of the engagement or the key message here, and yeah, you can see, for example, here on the right side, the chemicals or the materials produced from biomass can help to reduce the CO2 emissions. So the customer can use this message, and we also offer the background here and what it means, so they can tailor it for their product. But now I want to hand over to my colleague Yamini, and she wants to give you a quick overview about the results of the 3 product groups. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Yamini from Efotech, and I'll be covering the status quo of the bio-based chemical industry as a starting point for the roadmap, as well as results of the 3 specific product groups. I'll try to share my screen here so that I can
Yeah.
I think that should start.
And try. Perfect. Now it works. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so as part of preparing the roadmap, we had gone through several publicly available reports on the European bioeconomy as well as biochemicals. This is something which Leah, of course, mentioned earlier on, but the reason why we are going back to this is because we want to show the types of reports that we had referred to. So, for example, like on this slide, we have the infographics from CEFIC. The one on the left, it shows the sectors that are served by the EU chemicals industry. It gives an indication of the contribution that the chemical industry has to the EU economy. And the graph on the right shows that as of 2017, around 7.8 million tons of bio-based raw material were being used in EU chemicals production in this industry. The last bit of over here is that the graph also shows the breakdown by the feedstock. So they do cover quite a bit of information within these reports. However, for RoadtoBio project, we were focusing on 9 specific product groups. And these form subsets within the groups or categories that the CEFIC documents and other publicly available documents worked on. And so the very first task that we as a consortium had was to estimate the current share of bio-based chemicals and products in each of the 9 product groups. For this, we relied on Eurostat data and relevant literature, including market reports. So if you see on the left-hand side, the graph we have shows the production volume, both for fossil and bio-based chemicals in the EU. And the one on the right-hand side is just for the bio-based share. The information we have here dates back to 2015. However, it does give an indication of the portfolio in these 9 product groups. For example, if you see the plastics and polymers group, this comprises the very largest volume of chemicals and products among the 9 groups. However, in case of the bio-based share, it's only around 2%. On the other hand, bio-based share is much higher in lower volume product groups, such as surfactants, paints and coatings, as well as cosmetics. So just to recap the 9 groups that we focused on, we covered cosmetics, adhesives, surfactants, paints and coatings, agrochemicals, lubricants, solvents, man-made fibers, and plastics and polymers. As part of this webinar, we'll be covering cosmetics, agrochemicals, and paints and coatings. Now, before getting into these 3 specific product groups, we would like to draw your attention to these tables that we had worked upon while drawing up the roadmap. The roadmap does take input from lots of deliverables that were done over a period of 1.5 years before the roadmap development started. However, while we were writing it, we had to delineate what kind of sustainability characteristics are there which are important for bio-based chemicals versus the fossil chemicals. And that's what this table tries to bring out. So the sustainability characteristics that we focused on were biodegradability, low human toxicity, low ecotoxicity, low GHG, and recyclability. There are several key bio-based chemicals that were identified in each of the product groups as part of this exercise. For each of these chemicals, we covered points such as what is the percentage of bio-based content, are these drop-ins or smart drop-ins or dedicated chemicals, what TRL level are they at the moment, and if there were any other key features that we considered important, then these were included in the comments section. So that's quite a bit of information in these tables for each of the product groups. However, in order to summarize all this for our analysis, we decided to assign all these chemicals to certain specific sub-product groups. And that's the column that you see on the left-hand side, the very first column. So this, the example we have here is for the solvents product group, and the three chemicals that we have on this slide are all assigned to hydrocarbons. So on to the next slide, which is the first slide on cosmetics. If you see the first column that we have here, it's on subgroup. And this is for sure the subproduct group that I explained just a moment ago. If this were a solvents slide, then one of the subgroups would be hydrocarbons. But now going back to cosmetics, here you see that we have four main subgroups: botanical extracts, other building blocks, functional ingredients, solvents, and vegetable oils. In all of these four subgroups, we find that biodegradability and low ecotoxicity are the key sustainability drivers. Additional drivers were also identified for each of the product groups. And in case of cosmetics, this is about the regulatory burdens to commercialization of cosmetic products. So what we mean by this is that if bio-based raw materials or ingredients are imported, then they tend to face higher regulatory barriers versus if they were to be produced within the EU. And finally, we have a list of barriers for the uptake of bio-based within each product group. Ideally, we would have liked to have the action points right next to the barriers over here, but there's only so much that you can fit into one page. And as a result, we split this infographic into two parts, and you'll see that the barriers are replicated in the next slide. For that reason, I won't be going through this list over here, but in the following slide. The very last point that I will cover here is about the addressable market, which is on the top right corner here. So by addressable market for bio-based chemicals and products, we mean that this is based on the current production volume of fossil-based chemicals in that product group within Europe. So if you remember the slide that I mentioned earlier on about the bio-based portfolio within each of the 9 product groups, we had a graph about the total production volume of fossil and bio-based. If we are only looking at the fossil portion of that graph, then that's what we are referring to as the addressable market. That's the entire market that is still available for the bio-based products to enter or cover. And so we group these as small, medium, and large addressable markets. So in case of cosmetics, since the fossil-based production volumes are less than 1,000 kilotons per year, we categorize this group as small addressable market. So here, what we cover here is the barriers to bio-based uptake and the actions that are needed to be taken between now and 2030. The actions were categorized as short-term, mid-term, and long-term actions. We also identify stakeholders who need to be involved for implementing these actions. For example, government and industry need to be involved in all the actions that are identified here. I'll start with the midterm action points that are listed. So here, the first barrier is about a long and expensive approval process for switching from one chemical to another, especially if they are derived from residues or genetically modified organisms. So the action that's being suggested here is that shorter and more affordable approval procedures are required for chemicals that are not toxic. Plus, if they have identical chemical structure as one that has already been approved, then the approval process should hopefully be a bit more straightforward. And the second action is financing options need to be available to cover approval procedures. And this could be partly from the government and partly from industry. The next barrier is that different cosmetic companies have different definitions when it comes to natural or bio. And the action here is that we need a consultative process between the industry, policymakers, and consumers in order to align our understanding about these definitions. and to increase standardization. The next barrier is also definitions oriented, but more from a consumer's perspective. Here, it's about the information on difference between organic and natural cosmetics. That's not always clear. So the action that we have suggested over here is to improve labeling in cosmetic products. And the last barrier over here, which requires several long-term actions, is that producers are concerned about the functionality, cost competitiveness, and availability of bio-based ingredients. And over here, the actions that are suggested are all R&D based. They cover R&D to improve biomass supply, in order to use new feedstocks, find cost-effective ways to extract bioactive ingredients from feedstocks, as well as to develop bio-based cosmetics that are way better or outperform their fossil equivalents. So that in gist is what we covered for cosmetics. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that there may be several other barriers that you would consider that we should have looked into. It's quite possible that those are included in a separate chapter known as the generic barriers. This was a whole other chapter that we dedicated quite a bit of time to in the strategy document. So that's it for cosmetics. We will now move on to agrochemicals. Here, the key subgroups that were identified are fungicides, insecticides, solvents for insecticides and pesticides, and coatings for fertilizers. By coatings for fertilizers, we mean the casings in which fertilizers are manufactured in so that they can be released gradually into the soil. And these casings are usually polymer-based, or the coatings are polymer-based, and usually fossil at the moment. The aim is to replace them with bio-based coatings. So that's why, and given that fertilizers are quite produced in quite large quantities, the coatings will also be equally quite a big market to look into. Biodegradability, low human toxicity, and low ecotoxicity are the main sustainability drivers for this group. And the potential for new bio-based formulations that can overcome the problem of pesticide resistance was identified as an additional driver. Finally, the addressable market for bio-based agrochemicals in the EU is in the medium addressable market category. As before, I'll be covering the barriers in the following slide. So here again, 4 main barriers and actions have been identified. Most of them are midterm actions up to 2026, and one of them is quite a long-term one. Starting with the barriers that have midterm actions, we have first barrier is that we need bio-based, or there is a lack of bio-based alternatives that are compatible with the plants that they're applied to. So we need to focus efforts on developing bio-based chemicals that have either low or absolutely no phytotoxicity effect. And these can be reliable when they're applied in the field. The next barrier is that few bio-based solvents are available for agrochemicals that can fulfill, say, being compatible with a wide range of active ingredients. And so the action suggested is that we invest in R&D and innovation to create solvents that have this functionality or even superior functionality. A third and important barrier is that the use of new ingredients in agrochemical products is subject to long and often expensive approval procedures. So one of the actions for this is that we need to explore options of shorter and more affordable approval procedures. From our stakeholder consultation, we got to know that there is a low risk category within a specific legislation that places plant protection products on the market in the EU. And this could be readily adapted for specific approval of bio-based pesticides, and that it has already been ratified by the European Parliament. However, it has not yet been actioned by the European Commission. Now, this is as of April 2019. this information was from that time. Then the next action associated with this barrier is that we need financial support for SMEs for these approval procedures because they're quite expensive and quite long drawn. Then the next barrier, or the last barrier for the agrochemicals group, is that bio-based agrochemicals face tough competition from established fossil-based equivalents. Now, this is the barrier which we came across in every product group, and it's common for all biochemicals across the industry. For agrochemicals specifically, we think that the action required is a gradual increase of the bio-based content of commercially available agrochemicals. And this could be done by replacing some of the fossil-based intermediates or building blocks with bio-based drop-ins during the manufacturing process. So that brings us to the final product group that we'll be discussing in this webinar today. This is paints and coatings. The subgroups that we looked at over here are additives, binders, polymers, hardeners, and solvents. And as you can see, when it comes to sustainability drivers, they are quite different when it comes to different subgroups. The additional drivers that were identified here focused on reduced drying time, improved hydrophobicity, and chemical resistance. In terms of addressable market, this product group falls in the small addressable market category. That's within or less than 1,000 kilotons of production per year. And that we come to the final slide here, which is on the barriers and actions for the paints and coatings product group. First barrier is about cost competitiveness of bio-based solvents and coating materials versus fossil options. The midterm action suggested is that there is a need for regulations in order to drive bio-based share in paints and coatings. And the mid to long-term action is that we might need to impose a carbon tax as well as subsidize bio-based products for that interim period. Then the next barrier is regarding high costs that are involved in developing new formulations. The action is, or the several actions over here are about funding schemes and establishment of technology platforms for development of new formulations, as well as continuing the process of development of these new formulation systems and databases. The last two barriers we have for this category are both performance oriented. One is about the yellowing of bio-based substances. So one overcoming this would be to identify or match ingredient properties and their applications, so that even if yellowing does occur, then it doesn't affect the overall appearance, or it is applied in certain places where it doesn't matter what coloration or discoloration happens. The very last barrier on this slide is that changes in product properties would require new painting application techniques, which the consumer may not always be aware of. And so for this, the long-term action suggested is that we need to educate users about application techniques, and this would involve appropriate labeling as well as instructions. Alongside, the benefit of bio-based paints needs to be communicated to users. So it's an awareness raising exercise that needs to be done. And we think it's the industry which could take a real pivotal role here, especially for the last two points, or the barriers and actions that are identified. And that brings me to the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for joining in and listening to us on this webinar here. As Leah has mentioned, all our deliverables and these 3 documents are available on the RoadtoBio website. The link is here on the slide. And do let us know if you have any questions. So that's it, and I'll hand it back to Laura. Thank you.